In the past, I've pointed out how black people and non-black people tend to have radically different views of civil rights. Defund the police is a perfect example of this. When Black Lives Matter demands that the police be defunded, they mean abolishing the police as an institution. No more police officers, period. White people, especially rich white people, view this same phrase very differently. To them, defund the police means to cut a portion of the funding allocated to police and turn it over to social programs. The black version of defund the police is not going to happen. What we are going to end up getting is the white version of defund the police. So this video is going to critique the white person version of defunding the police. There are no shortage of American TV shows and movies about the police. I want to start out by comparing two of them. Number 1, NCIS. In NCIS, federal police officers are professionals who work side by side with scientists and experts. They wear designer clothing and work in luxurious workspaces. They solve every case by using creative scientific experiments and techniques. NCIS's characters are not perfect. They chase false leads and suspect people who turn out to be innocent. However, by conducting a thorough investigation with lots of science, they always arrive at the truth. The real murderer always gets caught. Number 2. The Wire. The Wire is generally considered to be the most in-depth, thoughtful television show focusing on issues of police and crime in American cities. The show was written and directed by a radical leftist who intended it to be a Marxist critique of the postmodern American city. Now, I don't have a particular problem with Karl Marx's critique of capitalism. The failures of Karl Marx, in my view, are not in his critique, but in what he proposes as a replacement to capitalism. Because The Wire is a Marxist critique that generally does not offer solutions to the problems that it presents, I also find it to be a compelling critique. So let's talk about some themes that exist in The Wire. Number 1, lack of resources. In The Wire, the police are always struggling due to a lack of resources. Crime scene experts aren't always available when they're needed. Police supervisors are under pressure not to overcommit to investigations. Police officers and other government workers are poorly trained, and they often make mistakes. As a result of these limited resources, sometimes investigations that should have gone forward don't. Sometimes compelling evidence is lost or destroyed. Sometimes characters try to cover things up or take shortcuts. Sometimes these characters get away with it while other times they don't. The Wire is a much different show than NCIS, where the government always seems to have unlimited resources and always does the best job it can. Number 2, accountability. It's easy to track the performance of a business. How much profit is there? Tracking the performance of government workers, though, like police officers or teachers, is a lot more complicated. In The Wire, attempts to hold individual public workers accountable serves as a constant corrupting influence. Characters lie, take shortcuts, and throw each other under the bus to try and advance their careers and go up in rank at the police department. When the city tries to use crime statistics to hold the police department accountable, the police manipulate the statistics. Whenever there is any sort of scandal involving the police department, a lower-level police officer gets blamed for it. In the season of The Wire focusing on public schools, teachers and school administrators engage in these same behaviors. They teach directly to standardized tests and look for ways to manipulate the test results.
Juking the stats.
Excuse me?
Making robberies into larcenies. Making rapes disappear. You juke the stats and majors become colonels. I've been here before.
Things that are supposed to encourage good police, good teaching, etc., end up achieving the exact opposite. Number 3. Virtue versus the corrupting influence of money. Now, it's doubtful that the writers for The Wire intended to convey any sort of conservative message with their show. To the extent that one can nonetheless be extracted from it, I would say that a theme of the show is the struggle of virtuous behavior against the corrupting influences of money and power. The Wire has inner city black characters who just want to make an honest living. It also depicts certain police characters who believe in doing good, honest police work and putting the bad guys in jail. A lot of the show's drama is derived from these characters with good intentions struggling against other characters or institutions that have been corrupted by money, careerism, or political power. In its first season, the protagonist police officers seek assistance from a judge in starting a wiretap investigation into a drug organization. By the end of the season, they've sent several of the drug traffickers to prison, but instead of being praised, these officers get demoted and punished by the department. The leadership of the department does not value good police work. Instead, the police leadership would prefer that subordinate officers try and perpetuate and advance the careers of police leaders. Subsequent seasons of the show focus on particular institutions and how those institutions fail to address and end up perpetuating social problems in Baltimore. The second season concerns the local economy, the third, local politics, the fourth, the public schools, and the fifth, the Baltimore Sun newspaper. Throughout these seasons, The Wire's criminal characters also try but fail to solve these same problems. Efforts to make drug dealing into a legitimate business, to reduce violence, or to stop committing crimes altogether fail, or they cause the would-be reformer to be killed or lose power and status. If The Wire were written by a modern-day leftist, it would be a terrible television show. All of the police officers would be bad guys. All of the criminals would be good guys. It would be like NCIS, but turned on its head. The question I would pose to those who want to defund the police is as follows. Would you rather the police be more like what's depicted in NCIS or what's depicted in The Wire? Do you want professional police who always do their best? Or do you want underpaid and overwhelmed police who cut corners? Let's go over some of the general consequences of cutting funding to police departments. Number 1. Officers will be promoted less often, and promotions will be much more politicized. Number 2. Officer turnover will be much higher, and there will be fewer resources available to train police officers. Number 3. Police investigations will be much less thorough. Number 4. There will be less resources available to the department to deal with complaints against officers or for internal affairs investigations. Number 5. There will be less money and time available for police to use scientific techniques in order to solve crimes. Number 6. Officers will be more likely to take and get away with taking shortcuts. Police morale is also likely to be significantly lower. Now, these are just the general problems. What about specific cuts the police may take? Well, let's go over the things that police do and how they may be compromised by large cuts to police department budgets. Number 1. Patrol. The most basic function of a police department is to respond to emergency calls. Since this is generally accepted as a core function of the police department, I would say that it's the least likely to be impacted by cuts. If police did make cuts to patrol, it would mean police would not be able to respond in time to events such as shootings, robberies, home invasions, rioting, and the looting of businesses. Number 2. Traffic accidents and DUI. Police investigate traffic accidents that occur on the highways, including fatal accidents. They also investigate drunk drivers and help remove wrecked cars and other obstructions from the road. If the police choose to cut their traffic operations, the most likely thing to happen is that they'll stop investigating traffic accidents. What will also likely happen is that traffic obstacles will take much longer to be cleared off the road, and there will be more drunk driving going on. Car insurance rates will likely increase across the board, and commute times will be subjected to more and longer interruptions. Number 3. Simple property crime. The most common victim crime is simple property crime. Those victimized the most by this tend to be retail stores, pharmacies, and gas stations. Pretty much the stupidest thing that police could do is to stop responding to these calls. That's because the police departments are funded through state and local sales tax, as well as property taxes. If people are able to get away with shoplifting, you will see the value of these stores go down, and sales tax revenue collected would also drop significantly. In other words, if police stop enforcing simple property crimes, it will just cause an endless cycle of additional police budget cuts. Number 4. Complex property crimes. Many of the longest and most time-consuming police investigations are for white-collar crimes. Crimes such as embezzlement. These investigations usually require police officers to use search warrants and subpoenas to obtain voluminous bank documents. The victims of these types of crimes tend to be either individual people or small businesses. The amount of losses tends to be pretty massive relative to the wealth of the victim. Cutting back these investigations would probably save a lot of police resources. But do we really want to stop investigating con artists or embezzlers who get rich swindling people? Number 5. Sex crimes. The police are responsible for monitoring sex offenders and collecting and testing rape kits. The police also conduct investigations into the sexual exploitation of children, often by hiring a forensic interview who is trained to conduct a non-suggestive interviews of children who may be victims. If police choose to make cuts to these investigations, I would expect to see more sex offenses, a backlog of untested rape kits, and more investigations proceeding where the police themselves interview child sex crime victims. That last consequence would also likely mean more jury trials in these cases and fewer convictions of defendants accused of sex crimes against children. Number 6. Complex drug crimes. Complex drug crimes are pretty unique in that they're pretty much the only type of investigation that police do that actually generates money for the police department. It accomplishes this mostly through asset forfeiture of funds and bank accounts used by drug traffickers. Most of the leads for this type of investigation come from the federal government, through its surveillance of banking institutions. For a lot of the time, the police don't even have to invest a whole lot of resources into these investigations. Now, if police want to do a really elaborate investigation with a wiretap, yeah, that'll probably cost a lot of money. However, a lot of times these investigations will lead to asset forfeitures that would more than cover the cost of the investigations. I therefore doubt that police budget cuts would lead to a reduction in these types of investigations. Number 7. Homicides. Most police departments tend to take homicide crimes very seriously. Even with substantial budget cuts, I doubt police would ever stop investigating these crimes. However, I think you would see cutbacks to the sort of NCIS style forensic science that police use to solve some of these cases. I seriously doubt, for example, that a police department facing substantial budget cuts is going to bother investigating cold cases. Of course, the smartest thing for us to do would be to not cut funding to the police, period. The goal should be to have a police department that functions more like the one in NCIS than the one depicted in The Wire. Punishing police departments will only make things worse, not better. But what about the schools and the social services and everything else? It's not just defunding the police, says the leftist. It's redistributing money to other public services that need funding. This sort of thinking shows just how much neoliberals have dumbed down the left. Funding essential state and local government services should not be viewed as a zero-sum game. You can raise teachers' wages without having to cut the police budget. In fact, I would say we would be much better off if we had the sort of robust state and local government services offered by countries like Japan. Japan has almost no crime and much fewer social problems than the United States. I attribute this at least partially to the fact that the Japanese are highly confident in their local government officials. Japanese people don't use drugs or commit crimes because they believe if they do, they'll be held accountable for it. Cutting funding to police departments is a bad idea. If anything should be defunded, it ought to be the worthless federal government and all of these banks and companies that stole our taxpayer resources through corrupt bailouts. Those are the institutions that ought to be defunded. But what about justice for George Floyd? You know, the greatest black man who ever lived. In response, I would say the following. Doesn't it make more sense to punish the actual officers involved in his death rather than the police generally?
Juking the stats.
The bottom line is, you're not going to appease Black Lives Matter by cutting police budgets. They are still going to hate you, and they're still going to be pissed off at you because you didn't fully defund the police. This will be nothing but another failed attempt by white people to solve the race problem in America. Just like The Wire shows us that capitalism without virtue cannot solve endemic social problems, we cannot solve the issue of race with budget cuts and more welfare. Cultivating morality and virtue and depoliticizing race is the only way to solve these problems. But anyways, that's all I've got for today's video. If you liked the video and you're not subscribed to my channel, please help out small YouTube channels like mine by subscribing to them. Thank you.